My daughter was sobbing quietly against my chest while my private driver navigated the busy Atlanta traffic. Her warm tears soaked right through my silk blouse, but I did not care about the ruined fabric. I only cared about the banking application glowing brightly on my phone screen. With one single tap, I was about to wipe out 15 years of funding a fake empire. My in-laws were probably still standing in the luxury fitting room, sipping complimentary champagne and patting themselves on the back. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their lavish lifestyle was already dead. My name is Nia, and I am 38 years old. I am the founder and CEO of a highly successful health tech software company. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my husband's toxic family piece by piece, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that nobody has the right to disrespect your child, especially the people who claim to be family. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, I learned early that hard work was the only way up. I built my company from a tiny startup in my living room into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. But to my mother-in-law, Beatrice, my self-made wealth was never quite good enough. Beatrice belonged to a specific circle of Atlanta society that prided itself on old money aesthetics and exclusive country club memberships. She was obsessed with appearances, and unfortunately, she carried deep-rooted prejudices about skin tone and hair texture, even within our own community. The nightmare truly began just 2 hours ago inside the ultra-exclusive private shopping suite at Neiman Marcus in Lenox Square. I had booked the VIP room for Beatrice and my sister-in-law, Chloe. We were supposed to be shopping for resort wear for a luxurious 2-week yacht trip to the Amalfi Coast. It was a family vacation that I was entirely funding. The charter alone cost $120,000, and I had given Beatrice and Chloe unlimited access to my platinum credit cards to buy whatever they needed for the trip. The VIP suite smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and fresh leather. A personal shopper was running back and forth bringing racks of Chanel dresses and Prada sunglasses for Chloe to try on. Beatrice was sitting on a plush velvet sofa sipping a glass of Prosecco. My 10-year-old daughter Zuri was sitting quietly in the corner of the room reading a book. Zuri is a beautiful, brilliant girl. She inherited my rich dark brown complexion and my thick natural hair, which I had styled into neat, beautiful braids for the summer. I stepped out of the room for just a moment to take a quick phone call from my chief operating officer. When I walked back toward the suite, the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. That was when I heard Beatrice speaking to Chloe in a sharp, condescending tone. Chloe had just held up a matching set of designer dresses and suggested that she, Beatrice, and Zuri could take a 3-generation photo on the deck of the yacht for her social media page. "Absolutely not," Beatrice snapped. "You need to cross Zuri off the passenger list entirely. I am calling Julian tonight to tell him to leave the child at home with a nanny." I stopped dead in my tracks right outside the door. My hand froze on the brass handle. Chloe sounded hesitant, but not entirely opposed. She asked her mother why Zuri could not come. Beatrice let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Look at the aesthetic we are going for, Chloe. We are taking photographs for that lifestyle magazine feature. We need to project an image of refined elite excellence. Zuri simply does not fit the look. Her skin is entirely too dark for those pastel colors you picked out. And those ethnic braids her mother insists on putting in her hair are completely unpolished. She does not look like she belongs in our family. She looks like a charity case we picked up from the inner city. Keep her at home." The silence that followed was deafening. I pushed the door open completely. Zuri had dropped her book on the floor. She was standing up with her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. Her lower lip was trembling, and large tears were silently rolling down her beautiful dark cheeks. She had heard every single word her grandmother just said. Beatrice looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a brief second, a flash of panic crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with her usual arrogant smirk. She adjusted her silk scarf and lifted her chin, defying me to challenge her. She expected me to scream. She expected an angry, loud confrontation that she could later use to paint me as an unhinged, emotional woman. She wanted me to make a scene so she could play the victim in front of the personal shopper. I did not give her that satisfaction. I did not say a single word to Beatrice. I did not yell and I did not argue. I walked straight past the racks of thousands of dollars worth of clothes that I was supposed to pay for. I knelt down in front of Zuri and wiped the tears from her face with my thumbs. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes and told her that she was the most beautiful girl in the entire world. I picked her up in my arms, holding her tightly against my chest. "Nia, where are you going?" Beatrice called out, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "We have not finished checking out yet. You need to leave your card with the manager." I turned my head and gave Beatrice a look so cold it could have frozen the champagne in her glass. I adjusted my grip on my crying daughter and walked out of the suite, leaving the door wide open behind me. I ignored Beatrice loudly scoffing about my lack of manners as I marched through the designer shoe department and straight out the front doors of the luxury mall. My driver quickly pulled the black SUV up to the curb. I climbed into the back seat with Zuri still wrapped safely in my arms. As the heavy doors closed, shutting out the noise of the city, Zuri buried her face in my neck and sobbed. She asked me why her grandmother thought her skin was ugly. My heart shattered into a million pieces, but the sorrow was instantly replaced by a raging, burning clarity. For 15 long years, I had paid for everything. I paid the mortgage on the massive house Beatrice lived in. I paid off the luxury cars my brother-in-law Desmond drove. I funded the ridiculous cosmetic procedures and designer handbags that allowed Chloe to pretend she was a wealthy socialite on the internet. And I paid for the lifestyle my husband Julian used to project the image of a successful investment consultant, even though he had not closed a real deal in 5 years. I had tolerated their snide comments and their passive-aggressive disrespect because I wanted Zuri to have a big, connected family. I thought my generosity would eventually buy their basic human decency. I was wrong. While I rocked Zuri back and forth, humming a soft melody to calm her down, I pulled my phone from my purse. I opened my private banking application. I navigated to the account management page for my Platinum credit line. There they were. 4 authorized user accounts: Julian, Beatrice, Chloe, Desmond. For years, those 4 accounts had drained hundreds of thousands of dollars from my hard-earned income. They swiped my cards at 5-star restaurants, at luxury car dealerships, and at high-end boutiques while treating me like an overgrown ATM machine. I selected Beatrice's name first. The screen prompted me to confirm if I wanted to temporarily freeze or permanently cancel the card. I pressed permanent cancellation without a second thought. Next was Chloe. Cancelled. Desmond. Cancelled. Finally, I looked at my husband's name. Julian, the man who had sat by silently for years while his mother made passive-aggressive comments about my background. The man who would undoubtedly defend his mother tonight and tell me I was overreacting. I pressed cancel on his card too. But I was not done. I logged out of the banking application and opened my email. I searched for the booking confirmation from the luxury yacht charter company in Italy. I found the direct phone number for my assigned concierge. I sent a brief typed message instructing them to cancel the entire $120,000 reservation immediately and process the refund back to my primary business account. I locked my phone and set it down on the leather seat next to me. Zuri had finally stopped crying and was resting her head against my shoulder, exhausted from the emotional whiplash. I kissed the top of her braided head and promised her that nobody would ever speak to her like that again. I picked my phone back up just to check the main dashboard of my banking portal one last time. The screen refreshed, displaying a simple, beautiful message in bold green text. 0 active authorized users. A quiet calm washed over me. I looked out the tinted window of the SUV, watching the Atlanta skyline roll by. Inside that mall, Beatrice and Chloe were currently loading up thousands of dollars worth of merchandise, unaware that the financial life support they had relied on for over a decade had just been violently unplugged. The countdown to their public humiliation had officially begun. 20 minutes later, inside the air-conditioned walls of Neiman Marcus, the scene I had meticulously orchestrated was playing out flawlessly. I was not there to witness it with my own eyes, but my private concierge later recounted every single delicious detail to me. Beatrice and Chloe had confidently marched up to the main VIP checkout counter on the designer floor. They were trailed by two exhausted store associates who were carrying massive stacks of garments. There were sheer silk caftans for the Amalfi Coast sunset dinners. There were matching Prada wedges. There were oversized woven beach totes and custom-fitted sunglasses. Beatrice stood tall at the marble counter, exuding the smug aura of a woman who believed she owned the very ground she walked on. She tapped her manicured fingernails impatiently against the glass display case, while the cashier, a young woman named Sarah, carefully scanned each tag. The register beeped continuously for nearly 5 minutes. When Sarah finally hit the total key, the screen displayed an astronomical sum of $25,432. Beatrice did not even blink. She casually reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the heavy metal black card that had my name linked to the primary account. She slid it across the marble counter with a haughty flick of her wrist. Sarah took the card with a polite smile and inserted it into the chip reader. The machine processed for a moment. Then it let out a sharp, obnoxious buzz. A bright red error message flashed across the digital screen. Declined. Sarah frowned slightly and pulled the card out. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Vance," she murmured respectfully. "It seems there was a read error. Let me try tapping it instead." Beatrice let out a dramatic, heavy sigh and rolled her eyes at Chloe. "This is what happens when they hire incompetent help," she whispered loudly enough for the cashier to hear. "Just run it again, dear, and do try to get it right this time. We have a very busy afternoon ahead of us." Sarah tapped the card against the screen. The machine buzzed again. This time the red text on the monitor was much more specific. "Account closed. Do not honor." The color drained from the young cashier's face. She looked at the card and then looked up at Beatrice. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the system is saying the account has been permanently closed." Beatrice slammed her hand down on the counter, causing a display of perfume bottles to rattle. "That is absolutely impossible," she hissed. Her voice was beginning to rise, drawing the attention of other shoppers. "Do you have any idea who I am? That is a premium corporate account. Your machine is clearly broken. Run it manually right now." By this time, the commotion had caught the attention of the floor manager. Mr. Sterling, a polished man who had catered to the Atlanta elite for over a decade, hurried over to intervene. He smoothly stepped in front of Sarah and took the card. He inspected the name on the front and then logged into his own master terminal to run a direct authorization check. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling said, keeping his voice low and discreet, "I assure you our machines are functioning perfectly. The primary account holder has placed a hard closure on this specific card. The bank is completely denying all authorization requests. The account no longer exists." Beatrice froze. For the first time in her pampered, arrogant life, she was speechless. She stared at the stack of garment bags and then at the black card resting uselessly on the marble counter. The worst part for Beatrice was not the clothes, it was the audience. Neiman Marcus on a Sunday afternoon is the epicenter of gossip for wealthy Atlanta socialites. Standing just a few feet away, pretending to browse a rack of scarves, was Mrs. Davenport, the head of the country club membership committee. Two other women from Beatrice's weekly charity luncheon were lingering near the shoe display, actively watching the entire humiliating spectacle unfold. They were whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting between the mountain of unpaid luxury clothes and Beatrice's flushed, angry face. Chloe stepped forward, desperately trying to salvage their dignity. "Mother, stop making a scene," she muttered, pulling Beatrice back by the arm. "I will just put it on Desmond's card. We can sort out this bank error later." Chloe whipped out her own supplementary black card, which was issued under her husband's name, but still entirely funded by my corporate account. She shoved it into the reader with a defiant glare at Mr. Sterling. The machine barely even processed before buzzing loudly. "Declined. Account closed." Chloe gasped. She tried pulling it out and swiping the magnetic strip. "Declined." The whispers from the nearby socialites grew louder. Someone let out a muffled laugh. The illusion of the untouchable, affluent Vance family was cracking wide open right in the middle of the designer floor. Mr. Sterling offered a tight, professional smile. "Ladies, if you would like to provide an alternative method of payment, perhaps a different bank, we can process the transaction. Otherwise, I am afraid I must ask my associates to return these items to the floor." Beatrice turned an ugly shade of red. She snatched the useless plastic cards off the counter. "We will be taking our business elsewhere," she announced, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound embarrassment. "Come along, Chloe." They had to turn around and do the walk of shame empty-handed, past the smirking faces of women they had looked down upon for years. They practically ran to the valet stand. I was sitting quietly in the back of my SUV when my cell phone shattered the silence. The caller ID flashed my husband's name, Julian. I let it ring 3 times. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I checked the rearview mirror to make sure Zuri was still distracted by her tablet and wearing her noise-canceling headphones. Then I swiped the screen to answer. Before I could even say a single word, Julian's voice exploded through the speaker. He was practically roaring. "What the hell is wrong with you, Nia?" he screamed. His voice was echoing slightly. I could hear the clinking of fine silverware against porcelain and the low hum of masculine conversation in the background. He was at Chop's Lobster Bar. It was his favorite high-end steakhouse, where he regularly hosted long, expensive lunches with his golf buddies, pretending he was a high-powered investment broker. I kept my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "Hello, Julian. How is your lunch going?" "Do not play games with me," he hissed violently, dropping his voice to a frantic whisper. He had obviously stepped away from his table to hide in a hallway or a bathroom. "I am standing here with 3 major potential clients. The waiter just came back to the table and told me my card was swallowed by the machine." Swallowed, Nia. Because it was flagged as a deactivated account. I smiled. The image of the arrogant Julian Vance having his card confiscated by a waiter in front of his wealthy friends was incredibly satisfying. "I told you I was reviewing our expenses, Julian," I replied calmly. "Reviewing expenses," he mocked bitterly. "You cut off my main line of credit in the middle of a business meeting. Do you have any idea how completely humiliating this is? I had to excuse myself to go to the restroom while they are sitting there staring at the bill. You are deliberately embarrassing me in front of very important people. You are making me look like a broke joke." "You are a broke joke, Julian," I thought to myself, but I kept those words locked away. Instead, I let the silence hang on the line for a few seconds, letting his panic simmer. "Turn the cards back on right now," Julian demanded. His tone shifted from panicked to commanding, falling back into his usual habit of trying to bully me into submission. "Call the bank, remove the freeze. I am not going to walk back out to that table and tell them my wife cut off my allowance. Fix this, Nia, now." My grip on the phone tightened. For years I had listened to this exact tone. The entitlement, the absolute audacity of a man who contributed nothing to our household, demanding unlimited access to the empire I built from scratch. He always played the victim whenever I tried to set financial boundaries, but today the dynamic was permanently altered. "The cards are not frozen, Julian," I said, clearly enunciating every single syllable. "They are permanently canceled. The accounts no longer exist. You will have to ask one of your important clients to cover the tab today, or perhaps you can wash dishes in the kitchen to pay off your prime rib." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The shock had finally hit him. "Nia," he said, his voice shaking with a sudden dark anger. "What are you doing? My mother just called me crying from the Neiman Marcus parking lot. She said her card declined too. What is going on with you today? Have you lost your mind?" I did not lose my mind, Julian. I found my spine. I leaned back against the leather seat of the car. My voice dropped to an icy, terrifying calm. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother just looked at our 10-year-old daughter. She looked at your own flesh and blood. And she told her sister that Zuri could not come on the family yacht trip because her skin is too dark and her braids are too unpolished for your little magazine photo op. Julian groaned in frustration. Oh my God, Nia, is this what this is about? My mother is from a different generation. She is just particular about aesthetics. You know how she is. You are going to ruin my business lunch and humiliate my family over a misunderstanding about a photo. You are being completely irrational and emotional. He was doing what he always did, gaslighting me, minimizing his family's cruelty and making me the villain for reacting to it. But his psychological tricks no longer worked on me. There was no misunderstanding, Julian, I replied, my tone completely devoid of warmth. She broke your daughter's heart, and you are defending her. So here is the new reality. If my daughter does not fit the aesthetic of your elite family, then my money certainly does not fit your wallets. Your mother just told your daughter her skin is too dark for the family photo. From now on, your elite family can fund its own lifestyle. Nia, wait! You cannot do this! He shouted, his voice echoing off the bathroom tiles in the restaurant. You cannot just cut us off. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. I stared at the screen as the call disconnected. I immediately went into my settings and temporarily blocked his phone number. I did not want to hear his excuses. I did not want to hear him beg. I had just drawn a line in the sand with permanent ink. The war had officially begun, and I was holding all the ammunition. It took exactly 42 minutes for the heavy oak front doors of our Buckhead mansion to slam open. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of the expansive foyer, vibrating all the way up to my second-floor home office. I was sitting quietly at my mahogany desk, just listening. I knew Julian would not stay at the restaurant after being so publicly humiliated in front of his peers. He had driven his luxury sports car back home, recklessly exceeding the speed limit just to come scream at me. I heard his heavy footsteps pounding against the imported marble staircase. He was moving fast, fueled by pure entitlement and rage. As his footsteps approached the second-floor landing, my breath caught in my throat. I waited in the silence to see what he would do next. Zuri's bedroom was the very first door at the top of the stairs. The heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, and I could softly hear the cheerful sounds of a television playing a cartoon. If Julian had a single ounce of paternal instinct in his body, he would have stopped right there. He would have walked into his daughter's room, sat on the edge of her bed, and held her. He would have wiped away her lingering tears and told her that she was beautiful and fiercely loved, no matter what his mother said. Instead, I heard the heavy thud of his expensive leather shoes march directly past her room, without even a slight pause. He did not care about her broken heart. He only cared about his broken credit card. My office door flew open with such violent force that the brass handle dented the drywall. Julian stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. His custom-tailored suit jacket was thrown over his arm, and his expensive silk tie was aggressively loosened around his neck. His face was flushed a deep, angry red. "Are you out of your damn mind?" he yelled, stepping into the room and slamming the door shut behind him. I just had to call Desmond to borrow cash to leave a tip at the restaurant. The waiter looked at me like I was a beggar off the street. "Do you have any idea how much damage you just did to my professional reputation today?" I kept my eyes focused on my laptop screen, refusing to look up at him immediately. "Your professional reputation is a complete illusion, Julian," I said, my voice steady and entirely drained of sympathy. "I am far more concerned about the psychological damage your mother just inflicted on our child. Did you even look in Zuri's room when you stormed up those stairs just now?" Julian threw his jacket onto the leather sofa in the corner of my office. "Do not try to change the subject and hide behind our daughter," he barked, pacing across the Persian rug. "I talked to my mother on the drive over here. She told me exactly what happened at the mall. She was just talking about color palettes for a stupid magazine spread. You know exactly how she is. She is old school. She has very specific tastes when it comes to presenting the family to high society. You took a harmless aesthetic comment and blew it entirely out of proportion, because you have always been deeply intimidated by her class." I slowly closed my laptop and looked him dead in the eyes. "Intimidated by her class," I repeated. "Your mother called our daughter a charity case from the inner city because her skin is dark and she wears braids. That is not old school, Julian. That is pure, unadulterated racism and deep self-hatred. And you are standing in my house defending the woman who crushed your little girl's spirit just because she bought you a nice steak lunch. Julian scoffed, running a hand roughly over his face. You are being completely hysterical right now. You are acting like a petty emotional woman trying to punish my entire family because your feelings got hurt over a dress fitting. You cut off my sister. You cut off Desmond. What did they do to you? Nothing. You are just flexing your financial muscles to humiliate us, and I am not going to stand for it. I pushed my heavy chair back and stood up. I am not acting emotional, I replied softly, maintaining unbreakable eye contact. I am acting like a chief executive officer cutting off dead weight from my payroll. I am acting like a mother protecting her cub from predators. And as for flexing my financial muscles, you are absolutely right. I am flexing them. Because they are my muscles. I built the wealth that your family has been leeching off of for over a decade. Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh. He leaned his hands heavily on the edge of my desk, getting dangerously close to my face. You built this, he sneered, pointing around the luxurious room. You really think you did all of this by yourself? You wrote some code in a basement, Naya. That is all you did. I am the one who networked. I am the investment consultant who introduced you to the right venture capitalists. My connections built Apex Health Tech. You would not have a single major hospital using your software if it were not for the doors my family name opened for you. You owe us. I stared at him, letting his massive delusion hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. Then I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. I tossed it onto the polished wood right in front of him. What is this? He demanded, eyeing the folder suspiciously. That is a summary of your immense contributions to this household, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. I had my accounting department run a full financial audit on your so-called consulting firm last week. Would you like to know what they found, Julian? Because I can read it to you right now. You have not secured a single viable corporate contract in exactly 5 years and 4 months. Not one. Julian shifted his weight slightly, his eyes darting away from the folder. That is ridiculous. I have been laying the groundwork for massive international mergers. The market has been incredibly slow, and you know that. Before he could speak another lie, I opened the folder myself. Let us look at the numbers, shall we? In the past 12 months alone, your consulting firm claimed $300,000 in operating expenses that my company completely covered. You spent $40,000 entertaining clients who never signed a single piece of paper. You spent $60,000 on luxury car leases for vehicles that just sit in our massive driveway. And let us not forget the $100,000 salary you pay yourself to show up at a rented office space twice a week just to read sports magazines. Julian's face went from an angry red to a pale, sickly color. You are violating my privacy, he stammered, taking a step back. You have no legal right to dig through my business accounts. Your business accounts are entirely funded by my primary equity line, I reminded him, my voice cold and surgical. I have every legal right to see exactly where my money is burning. You have been running a massive deficit for half a decade. Meanwhile, my software company just secured a federal contract with the largest hospital network in the Southeast. I am the one bringing in the millions. I am the one keeping the lights on in this massive 10,000 square foot house. I am the one who paid for the designer clothes on your mother's back today. I took a step closer to him, refusing to back down even an inch. So do not ever stand in my office and tell me I owe you anything. You and your entire family have extracted every ounce of imaginary debt you think I owed you. The bank is officially closed. Now get out of my office and go pack your things. Julian froze in place. His anger faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by genuine shock. Excuse me, he asked. You heard me, I said, pointing a firm finger toward the office door. Pack a bag. You are not sleeping in the master suite tonight. You are not sleeping in this house at all. You can go sleep in the guest house over the garage. Or you can go stay with your mother since you love defending her so much. But you are not staying here under the exact same roof as the daughter you completely refused to protect today. Julian stared at me for a long, tense time. The shock slowly wore off, and the pure venom returned to his eyes. He realized that his usual tactics of loud intimidation and psychological gaslighting were completely failing. I was not crying. I was not apologizing for hurting his fragile ego. I was standing my ground like a fortress he could not breach. He picked up his suit jacket from the sofa and slung it aggressively over his shoulder. He walked slowly back toward the door, but he did not look defeated. Instead, a slow, extremely ugly smirk spread across his face. It was the terrifying smile of a man who firmly believed he held a secret weapon. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room, do you not, Nia?" he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing octave. "You think because you canceled a few plastic cards and locked me out of the main house that you have somehow won this little game. You think you can just discard me like trash." I did not answer him. I just stood tall and waited for him to leave. "You are forgetting one very important detail about the family laws in the state of Georgia," he continued, leaning casually against the doorframe. "We do not have a prenuptial agreement. We got married long before your little software startup made its very first million. I was there from the very beginning, which means legally, I own 50% of Apex Health Tech. I own 50% of this expensive mansion. I own 50% of every single dollar sitting in your bank accounts right now." He let out a dark, breathless chuckle that made my skin crawl. "You cannot cut me off, Nia. You can throw a massive emotional tantrum all you want, but if you try to push me out of this family, I will take half of your entire empire. I will gut your precious company and leave you with absolutely nothing." He turned around and walked out into the hallway, intentionally leaving the door wide open. I listened to his heavy footsteps echo down the hall toward the master bedroom to pack his overnight bag. The large house fell completely silent, save for the faint muffled sound of the cartoon still playing in Zuri's room. I stood alone in the center of my office, breathing in the heavy, tense air. Julian thought his threat would paralyze me. He thought the terrifying fear of losing half my life's work would force me to surrender and turn the money back on by morning. He did not know who he was dealing with. I walked calmly back to my desk and sat down in my heavy leather chair. I reached out and slowly opened my laptop screen, the bright light illuminating my face in the dim room. I pulled up my private encrypted email server and began typing a highly urgent message to my lead forensic accountant. "You want to take half of my empire, Julian," I muttered quietly to myself, the sound of my fingers flying aggressively across the keyboard. "We will see about that." I barely slept that night. The glow of my computer screen illuminated my home office until the sun began to rise over the sprawling estates of our Buckhead neighborhood. I spent hours building a fortress of financial security around myself and my business. I transferred personal assets, I routed emergency funds into new encrypted accounts, and I placed hard freezes on every minor auxiliary credit line I could locate. By the time I walked downstairs to the massive kitchen to brew a pot of dark black coffee, my mind was sharp and entirely focused on the impending war. I kissed Zuri on the forehead and watched my private security detail escort her safely to her elite private academy. The house was finally quiet, but that fragile peace was violently shattered exactly 10 minutes later. I was standing by the marble kitchen island holding my hot ceramic mug when the heavy front doors of the mansion swung open. I had revoked Julian's digital access the night before, but I had completely forgotten that Beatrice still possessed the master override code to our gated driveway and the physical spare key. The sharp clicking of her designer heels echoed aggressively across the imported hardwood floors of my grand foyer. "Nia," she called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and pure venom. "Where are you hiding?" She walked into the kitchen looking as though she was preparing for a high-fashion magazine cover shoot. She wore a tailored cream-colored pantsuit and an oversized string of thick pearls. Her hair was perfectly sprayed into an immovable helmet of stiff waves. She stopped in the center of the room and looked around with an expression of profound disgust, as if she were inspecting a cheap roadside motel instead of a $10 million mansion that my company had purchased entirely in cash. "You should really instruct your housekeeping staff to dust the crystal chandeliers," she remarked, casually running her manicured finger along the edge of the granite countertop. "This place is starting to look incredibly neglected." But I suppose that is exactly what happens when the lady of the house forgets her proper place and tries to play corporate boss instead of managing her home and her husband. I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the stone island. "How did you get past the front security gate, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "I am the matriarch of the Vance family," she replied, her chin tilting upward in pure arrogant defiance. "I do not ask for permission to enter my own son's house. Now fix me a cup of hot tea. We need to have a very serious conversation about the massive public embarrassment you caused my family yesterday afternoon at the mall." I did not move a single muscle toward the kettle. I simply stood there watching her perform her desperate little theater of dominance. "You caused your own embarrassment, Beatrice," I stated plainly, refusing to break eye contact. "You played a stupid, cruel game with my 10-year-old daughter and you won a very expensive prize. If you came into my home expecting an apology, you can turn right back around and march out the exact same door you just barged through." Beatrice let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. She slowly walked over to the kitchen island and leaned forward, resting her hands flat against the cold stone. She looked at me with eyes full of absolute contempt. "You really have no idea how any of this works, do you?" she whispered, shaking her head slowly. "You can buy all the expensive houses and fancy luxury cars in the world, Nia, but you will always just be a loud, angry woman with new money. You have absolutely no class, no pedigree, no understanding of how Atlanta high society actually operates." She began to pace slowly around the kitchen, treating the space as if she were lecturing a misbehaving servant. "We tolerated you because Julian claimed you had potential," she continued, her voice rising in volume and intensity. "We allowed you into our inner circles. We brought you to the country club. We introduced you to the people who actually matter in this city. If you think for 1 second that you can just cut off my credit lines and publicly humiliate me in front of my peers without facing severe consequences, you are completely delusional." I crossed my arms over my chest, letting her dig her own grave with her ridiculous words. "What consequences, Beatrice?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you going to uninvite me from your little afternoon charity teas? I will be absolutely devastated." "Do not use that sarcastic tone with me," she snapped, her face turning a deep shade of angry red. "I can ruin you, Nia. I can make one single phone call to the membership committee and have you entirely blacklisted from every single elite social circle in the state of Georgia. Nobody will invite you to their charity galas. Nobody will sit with you at the fundraising dinners. Your little tech company will become a complete social pariah because no respectable, wealthy family will ever do business with a woman who actively disrespects the Vance name." I stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then I threw my head back and I laughed. It was not a polite, quiet chuckle. It was a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the high ceilings and bounced around the empty kitchen walls. I laughed so hard that tears genuinely threatened to spill from the corners of my eyes. Beatrice froze in her tracks, her entire face contorted in absolute fury and utter confusion. "Stop laughing at me," she demanded, slamming her open palm violently against the marble countertop. "I am not joking with you." I slowly caught my breath, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. I took a deliberate step closer to her, completely invading her personal space until she was forced to take a step back. "You really believe that your dusty old country club memberships actually matter to me?" I asked, lowering my voice to a sharp, lethal whisper. "You think I care about sitting at a table with a bunch of broke women who rent their jewelry and lease their luxury cars just to pretend they have generational wealth?" "I am not a socialite, Beatrice. I am a chief executive officer. My software is currently managing the daily logistics of 52 major hospitals across the country. I do not need your fake little friends to validate my existence. And I certainly do not need your family name. The Vance name is completely useless. It is a hollow, empty brand that has not generated a single dollar of real wealth in over 3 decades. Beatrice gasped loudly, her hand flying up to clutch her ridiculous pearls. How dare you speak to me like that? I will speak to you however I choose in my own house. I fired back, my patience completely evaporated. But since you love making threats, let me tell you exactly what is going to happen next. Beatrice interrupted me, her eyes blazing with pure hatred. No, let me tell you what is going to happen. You are going to turn those credit cards back on today, because if you do not, I am going to march straight to Julian and instruct him to file for divorce. I will hire the most ruthless attorneys in Atlanta. We will drag you through the mud in open court. Julian will take half of your precious health tech company. He will take this massive house. He will take your retirement accounts. You will be left with absolutely nothing, and my son will walk away a very rich man. We will bleed you completely dry, Nia. She stood there breathing heavily, an ugly, triumphant smile spreading across her painted lips. She genuinely believed she had just delivered the ultimate killing blow. She thought the terrible threat of Julian taking half of my business would force me to fall to my knees and beg for her forgiveness. Instead, I felt a profound sense of absolute clarity. They were entirely predictable. Julian had threatened me with the exact same divorce strategy the night before. They were working together, reading from the exact same pathetic script. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying deadpan pitch. "Excuse me." Beatrice stammered, the triumphant smile instantly vanishing from her face. I pointed my finger directly toward the grand foyer. I said, "Get out of my house. I am officially revoking your physical access. If you ever step foot on my property again, I will not hesitate to call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs for criminal trespassing. Now turn around and walk out the door before I call my armed security team to physically remove you from the premises." "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her composure completely shattering into pieces. "I am Julian's mother." "Julian does not live here anymore," I replied coldly. "I kicked him out last night. Now go join him." Beatrice stood completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She looked around the massive luxury kitchen, realizing for the very first time that she possessed absolutely no power in this room. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She snatched her designer handbag off the kitchen island and practically ran toward the front door, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floors. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her with a massive thud, shaking the walls. I stood alone in the kitchen, breathing deeply, the adrenaline pumping fiercely through my veins. I had successfully cleared the house of the toxic infection that had plagued it for 15 years. I turned around to grab my coffee mug, feeling a deep, powerful sense of absolute victory. Then my cell phone vibrated violently against the stone countertop. The sudden buzzing sound made me jump. I reached out and picked up the phone, swiping the screen to unlock it. It was an automated text message alert from a premier banking institution. But it was not from my primary business account or my platinum credit line. It was an alert from an old joint high-yield savings account. It was an account I had opened 7 years ago with Julian right after Zuri was born to hold emergency liquid cash. In my furious rush to lock down my finances the night before, I had completely overlooked it because we rarely ever used it. I stared at the bright white screen, my heart suddenly pounding heavily against my ribs. The text message was short and brutally clear. Alert. An outgoing wire transfer in the amount of $500,000 has been successfully initiated and processed from your joint savings account ending in 4829. The blood drained completely from my face. I immediately opened my secure banking application and bypassed the security protocols to view the detailed transaction history. My fingers were trembling slightly as I pulled up the official wire transfer receipt. The money was gone. $500,000 in pure liquid cash had been wiped out in a single transaction exactly 3 minutes ago while Beatrice was standing in my kitchen screaming at me. Julian had initiated the transfer from his mobile device. I scrolled down to see the destination account for the massive wire. The receiving party was listed as a limited liability corporation called Apex Horizon Development. My mind raced frantically, piecing the puzzle together. I recognized that fake corporate name immediately. It was a shady shell company owned and operated entirely by Desmond, my useless brother-in-law. Desmond was a failed real estate developer who constantly bought cheap empty plots of land and never actually built anything on them. He had even used the word apex in his company name, attempting to leech off the corporate credibility of my own business. I leaned heavily against the kitchen island, the cold stone pressing against my stomach. This made absolutely no logical sense. Julian was arrogant and entitled, but he was not a complete idiot. He knew that stealing $500,000 from a joint account would immediately trigger a massive legal battle during a divorce. He knew I would hunt him down for every single penny. And yet he had panicked and drained the account anyway the very moment he realized his credit cards were permanently shut off. He did not transfer the money into a personal checking account to hire a ruthless divorce lawyer. He did not transfer the money to Beatrice to buy more designer clothes or fund their ridiculous yacht trip. He wired $500,000 directly to his brother-in-law's failing real estate company first thing in the morning. A dark, horrifying realization washed over me. This was not about pride. This was not about buying expensive resort wear for a magazine photo shoot or maintaining a high society image at the exclusive country club. You do not steal $500,000 in cash from your angry wife unless you are incredibly desperate. This was a massive emergency payoff. This was a ransom. Julian and Desmond were not just acting like entitled, spoiled brats. They were in serious, dangerous trouble, and I needed to find out exactly what kind of financial hell they had dragged my family name into before it burned my entire empire to the ground. I did not call Julian. Calling him would only give him the opportunity to spin another web of aggressive lies and gaslight me into believing the $500,000 wire was some kind of legitimate investment emergency. I needed raw, undeniable facts before I confronted him again. I locked the heavy doors to my home office and immediately dialed the direct cell phone number of Marcus Sterling. Marcus was not just a regular certified public accountant. He was a ruthless, highly specialized forensic auditor who had previously worked for the federal government tracking cartel money laundering schemes before entering the private sector. He handled the most sensitive financial architecture for my company. He was brilliant, discreet, and completely loyal to me. Marcus answered on the second ring. I did not bother with pleasantries. I gave him the exact account number, the routing details, and the LLC name for the $500,000 wire that had just cleared. I told him I needed a comprehensive, microscopic breakdown of every single transaction connected to Apex Horizon Development and Julian's private consulting firm. I told him to drop whatever he was doing and treat this as a Tier 1 corporate emergency. I sat at my mahogany desk for 3 agonizing hours. I drank my coffee black and cold while I watched the stock tickers and waited. The silence in the massive house was suffocating. My mind played through every terrible scenario, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer scale of the financial rot Marcus was about to uncover. When my secure line finally rang, I answered it instantly, putting Marcus on speakerphone. His voice was unusually tight and devoid of its normal relaxed confidence. "Nia, we have a massive, catastrophic problem," he said bluntly. The clicking of his keyboard echoed loudly in the background. "I have spent the last 3 hours tearing apart the corporate filings and banking histories for both your brother-in-law's real estate company and your husband's consulting firm. I had to bypass some serious encryption to get the complete picture, but I finally mapped the money flow." "Tell me everything," I demanded, leaning forward and pressing my elbows into the desk. "What is Apex Horizon Development actually building?" "Nothing," Nia, Marcus replied, his tone deadpan. "They are building absolutely nothing. I pulled the municipal records for every county in the state of Georgia. Desmond does not have a single active construction permit. He has not purchased a single pound of concrete steel or lumber in 4 years. There are no contractors on retainer. There are no architectural blueprints filed. Apex Horizon Development is a complete ghost ship." I frowned, staring at the blank wall of my office. "That is impossible, Marcus. Desmond has been throwing lavish launch parties for his luxury condo projects for years. He brings investors to empty dirt lots and shows them massive presentation boards. Where is all the capital going? It is going directly into his own pockets, and the pockets of the previous investors," Marcus explained, his voice dropping lower. Nia, your brother-in-law, is not a real estate developer. He is running a massive unregulated Ponzi scheme. The word hit me like a physical punch to the gut. A Ponzi scheme. Marcus continued outlining the terrifying reality. Desmond has been aggressively recruiting high-net-worth individuals from your country club and your social circles. He uses the Vance family name, and more importantly, he uses your reputation as a highly successful tech CEO to guarantee the safety of their investments. People give him hundreds of thousands of dollars believing they are funding luxury real estate developments. But Desmond just takes that new money to pay off the older investors who are demanding their returns. He is constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul just to keep the entire illusion from collapsing. My stomach twisted violently. And Julian? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How is my husband involved in this? Marcus sighed heavily. Julian is the primary laundering funnel. When Desmond fails to recruit enough new investors to pay out the old ones, the older investors start getting angry. They start threatening lawsuits. They start threatening to go to the authorities. Whenever the scheme is on the verge of total exposure, Julian steps in to plug the holes. Marcus sent a heavily encrypted file directly to my laptop. I opened it and stared at the highlighted spreadsheets. Julian has been using his so-called consulting firm to generate fake invoices to your tech company, Marcus explained. He bills you for network security audits or international market research that never actually happens. Your accounting department approves the invoices because Julian is your husband. The money flows from your corporate accounts into Julian's consulting accounts. Then Julian quietly transfers that clean corporate money into Desmond's shell companies disguised as private business loans. They have been siphoning your tech money to keep the Ponzi scheme afloat and pacify the angry investors. I felt physically sick. The sheer audacity of their betrayal was staggering. While I was working 80-hour weeks building a legitimate medical software company, my husband was actively stealing from my corporate treasury to fund his brother's criminal enterprise. They were risking everything I had ever built. If the federal authorities investigated Desmond's Ponzi scheme, they would trace the money right back to my company. Julian was dragging me into a massive federal fraud case. But what about the $500,000 from this morning? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of absolute rage and rising panic. Why did Julian drain our joint savings account today? He knows that money is easily traceable. He knows I would see the alert immediately. Why take such a desperate risk right after I canceled his credit cards? I tracked the wire. Marcus said, the rapid clicking of his keyboard stopping completely. The $500,000 did not go to angry country club investors, Nia. Desmond flew too close to the sun. The Ponzi scheme dried up completely 3 months ago. Nobody was investing anymore. Desmond was drowning in default notices, so he went completely off the grid and took a massive, unregulated cash loan from a private equity group out of Miami to keep the illusion going. A private equity group, I repeated, confused. That is what they call themselves on paper, Marcus corrected sharply. But I ran the names of the managing partners through my old federal databases. They are not bankers, Nia. They are highly organized, extremely dangerous loan sharks. They cater exclusively to desperate wealthy individuals who cannot secure legitimate bank loans. They charge astronomical interest rates, and they employ extremely violent collection methods when those debts are not paid on time. I closed my eyes, absorbing the horrifying weight of the situation. Desmond missed his last 3 balloon payments. Marcus continued relentlessly. The loan sharks gave him a final deadline of noon today to produce $500,000 in cash, or they were going to start enforcing the collection physically. That is why Julian panicked when you cut off the credit cards. They were planning to take massive cash advances on your platinum accounts this morning to pay off the loan sharks. When you froze the plastic, Julian had no choice but to raid the joint savings account. He transferred the $500,000 to Desmond's shell company, and Desmond wired it directly to Miami exactly 14 minutes ago. Julian had not stolen the money to hire a divorce lawyer or buy his mother a new house. He stole the money to prevent his brother from having his legs broken by Miami debt collectors. Julian had been using my flawless credit rating, my massive corporate liquidity, and my impeccable reputation as a human shield to protect his family's criminal debts. He was perfectly willing to let my life burn to the ground as long as it kept his brother out of a wheelchair and out of a federal prison cell. I am calling the authorities, I said firmly, opening my desk drawer to reach for my secondary secure phone. I am calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now, Marcus. I am turning over every single piece of data you just sent me. I will not let them drag my company down with them. I need to establish a legal firewall between my assets and their fraud immediately. Marcus did not respond right away. The silence stretched out over the secure line, growing heavier and more terrifying by the second. Marcus. I prompted, gripping the phone tightly. Did you hear me? Prepare the forensic packages for the federal authorities. Marcus finally spoke, his voice sounding hollow and genuinely frightened. Before you call the authorities, there is something else you need to see. I was doing a final sweep of your personal asset portfolio just to make sure they had not compromised anything else. I found a massive anomaly. What kind of anomaly? I asked, the cold dread settling deep into my bones. Marcus let out a slow, shaky breath. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a fraction of a second, staring blindly at the glowing screen of my laptop. The Buckhead mansion was completely paid for. I had purchased the $10 million estate in cash exactly 4 years ago, after Apex Health Tech went through its first massive private valuation. The property was supposed to be fully owned, free and clear. It was the safest, most secure asset in my entire financial portfolio. It was the house where my daughter slept every single night. What are you talking about, Marcus? I demanded, my voice rising in a sharp, desperate pitch. I own the house outright. There is no mortgage on the property. I have the original physical deed sitting inside the titanium safe directly behind my desk. You might have a piece of paper in your safe? Marcus replied, his tone grim and absolute. But the electronic records filed with the county clerk's office tell a completely different story. And the corporate debt registry for Apex Health Tech has a massive new entry that was flagged by the system just 72 hours ago. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. I placed the phone flat on the desk, turning the speakerphone volume all the way up. I opened a new browser window and logged directly into my secure corporate credit portal, navigating through the complex menus with frantic, aggressive keystrokes. I am looking at the corporate dashboard right now, I said, my eyes scanning the rows of numbers. What exactly am I looking for, Marcus? Tell me where to click. Look at the secondary collateralized liabilities, Marcus instructed. Look at the Small Business Administration federal loan column. I scrolled down the page, my eyes locked onto a massive bold line item that had never been there before. It was a fresh corporate debt obligation. The numbers blurred together for a moment before snapping into sharp, terrifying focus. I felt the air leave my lungs completely. The room started to spin slowly around me. I reached out and gripped the heavy edge of the mahogany desk just to keep myself anchored to the floor. Marcus asked quietly through the speaker. Do you see it? I see it, I whispered, my voice cracking under the devastating weight of the revelation. The anomaly was not a simple accounting error. It was not a small unauthorized charge or a hidden consulting fee. It was a catastrophic financial bomb planted directly underneath the foundation of my entire life. Marcus repeated, his voice steady but laced with deep concern. You need to look at the deed to your house and the company's line of credit. While I was trapped in my home office staring at the catastrophic reality of a forged $2.5 million federal loan, Beatrice and Chloe were busy launching a massive social counterattack. They did not know that I had discovered the loan. They did not know that I knew about the loan sharks in Miami. They still believed this was merely a petty domestic dispute over a canceled yacht trip and a few black cards. And their strategy for domestic disputes was always the same: total social annihilation. That afternoon, Beatrice hosted an emergency high tea at the Piedmont Country Club. The Piedmont was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta's black elite society. It was a place where multi-million-dollar business deals were struck over cucumber sandwiches and where reputations were built or destroyed before the Earl Grey even got cold. Beatrice had called in every single favor she had to secure the grand sunroom on a Sunday afternoon. She invited 50 of the most influential women in the city. There were wives of city councilmen, prominent judges, and the spouses of several major investors in my health tech company. Beatrice arrived wearing a somber navy blue dress, looking the part of a deeply concerned and heartbroken matriarch. Chloe flanked her, looking equally distressed, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. They sat at the head of the long, elegantly decorated table and systematically began to assassinate my character. It is with a very heavy heart that I have to share this with all of you. Beatrice began, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed sorrow. I am afraid Nia is suffering from a very severe mental breakdown. A collective gasp echoed around the room. The women leaned in, completely captivated by the scandalous news. Julian has been trying to hold the family together for months, Beatrice continued, wiping away a fake tear. But Nia has become incredibly paranoid and unstable. She locked my son out of their home last night. She is completely neglecting poor little Zuri, leaving the child with nannies while she locks herself in her office. And the worst part is she has completely lost control of her finances. Chloe chimed in, playing her supporting role flawlessly. She canceled all of Julian's access to the family accounts this morning. She left him humiliated at a business lunch. We are terrified she is going to liquidate Zuri's college funds. But why would she do that? One of the judge's wives asked, frowning in confusion. Nia's company is incredibly successful. That is the absolute worst part, Beatrice whispered, leaning forward dramatically. I was not going to say anything to protect her dignity, but I feel I owe it to our community. Apex Health Tech is not doing well. In fact, Julian told me in strict confidence that the Securities and Exchange Commission is currently investigating Nia for massive corporate fraud. She is lashing out at her family because she knows she's about to lose everything. She is trying to hide assets before the federal indictments come down. The room erupted in shocked whispers. The lie was brilliantly constructed. It played perfectly into the insecurities of wealthy society. By claiming my company was under federal investigation, Beatrice was not just spreading gossip. She was actively threatening the financial interests of anyone connected to me. She was intentionally poisoning my professional well. The results of her toxic tea party were immediate and devastating. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my secure cell phone began to ring incessantly. The first call was from David Harrison, one of my oldest and most trusted board members. Nia, what the hell is going on? David asked, his voice tight with panic. My wife just came back from the country club. She said Beatrice Vance is running around telling half the city that the SEC is preparing to raid our corporate headquarters. Is there something you need to disclose to the board immediately? David, there is no SEC investigation, I replied, rubbing my aching temples. Beatrice is retaliating against me because I cut off her personal allowance this morning. She is throwing a social tantrum. Nia, I believe you, David said, letting out a heavy sigh of relief. But you need to understand how bad this looks. 2 of our major angel investors were at that tea party today. Their wives are currently calling them, telling them to pull their funding before the feds show up. The rumors are spreading like wildfire. You need to get out ahead of this immediately. Issue a press release. Threaten Beatrice with a defamation lawsuit. Do whatever you have to do to shut her up before our stock price takes a hit tomorrow morning when the markets open. I promised David I would handle it and hung up. Before I could even set the phone down, it rang again. It was the principal of Zuri's private academy calling to politely express concern about rumors of domestic instability at our home. Then came a call from the chairwoman of a major charity gala I was supposed to host next month, asking if I needed to step down due to personal health reasons. Beatrice was trying to burn my entire world to the ground just to force me into submission. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to call Julian, begging for him to fix the social damage, hoping I would offer to turn the money back on if he could just get his mother to stop talking. She fundamentally misunderstood the kind of woman she was dealing with. I did not panic. I did not cry. And I absolutely did not draft a frantic defensive press release denying the SEC rumors. Defensive statements always sound guilty. When you are fighting a war against a woman who uses gossip as her primary weapon, you do not fight back with more words. You fight back with undeniable, devastating data. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. Beatrice wanted to air our dirty laundry in front of the entire country club. I decided it was time to show them exactly how filthy the Vance family truly was. I picked up my secure phone and called Marcus, my forensic accountant, back. Marcus, I need you to compile a very specific document for me right now, I said, my voice dangerously calm. What do you need, Nia? He asked, typing rapidly in the background. I need a comprehensive 10-year expense report, I instructed. I want every single dollar I have ever spent on Beatrice, Chloe Desmond, and Julian completely itemized. I want the plastic surgery receipts. I want the luxury car lease payments. I want the massive private club dues. And Marcus, I specifically want the exact dollar amounts Julian used to cover Beatrice's underground casino gambling debts 3 years ago. Put it all into a clean, heavily stylized PDF document. Make it look like a highly professional corporate prospectus. Marcus let out a low whistle over the line. You are going nuclear, Nia. They started a fire, I replied coldly. I am just providing the gasoline. How fast can you get it to me? Give me 45 minutes, Marcus said. The line went dead. While Marcus worked, I opened my laptop and logged into the Piedmont Country Club's private digital membership portal. As a Platinum tier member, I had access to the direct email directory of every single person registered at the club. I highlighted the entire list. 412 of the most powerful, wealthy, and influential individuals in Atlanta. Exactly 40 minutes later, an email arrived from Marcus. The attached PDF was beautiful. It was 50 pages long, incredibly detailed and devastatingly accurate. It read like a financial autopsy of a parasitic infection. I attached the PDF to my draft email. I left the subject line completely blank. In the body of the email, I typed a single simple sentence. For your review regarding the financial stability of the Vance family. I clicked send. The email bypassed the club's security filters and landed directly in the inboxes of all 412 members. It landed on the phones of the women who were still sitting in the sunroom drinking tea with Beatrice. It landed on the tablets of the men playing golf on the back nine. It landed on the desktops of the investors who were considering pulling their funding from my company. I sat back in my chair watching the digital delivery confirmations roll in one by one. The silence in my office felt different now. It was not the suffocating silence of anxiety. It was the deep quiet of the calm right before a massive storm makes landfall. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was not a board member. It was Chloe. I answered it and put it on speakerphone. What did you do? Chloe shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of its usual haughty arrogance. She sounded completely hysterical. I am sitting in the club dining room right now. Everyone is staring at us. Mrs. Davenport just walked over and asked my mother if she needed help contacting Gamblers Anonymous. 3 women just canceled their sponsorships for my upcoming charity luncheon. They know I do not own my Porsche Nia. They know you paid for my nose job. You ruined me. You ruined all of us. I leaned forward toward the microphone. I did not ruin you, Chloe. I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. Your mother tried to destroy my company with vicious lies. I simply defended myself with the absolute truth. The next time you decide to host a tea party, make sure you can afford to pay the check. I hung up the phone. I had successfully completely neutralized Beatrice's social smear campaign in less than an hour. The Vance family reputation was officially dead in the water. But the satisfaction was short-lived. I looked back at the second monitor on my desk where the terrifying reality of the forged $2.5 million federal loan was still glowing brightly. The country club drama was just a distracting skirmish. The real war, the war for my freedom, my company, and my future was about to begin. Because Julian was not going to take this public humiliation lying down. He was a cornered, desperate animal, and cornered animals always attack. Right on cue, the heavy front doors of the mansion slammed open again. Julian had returned. And this time he was not coming to yell about a canceled credit card. He was coming to protect his fraudulent loan. Julian stood at the bottom of the grand marble staircase, breathing heavily. His face was a mask of pure desperation and rage. He had driven back to the mansion the moment Chloe called him, screaming about the email I had just broadcasted to the entire country club directory. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are crossing lines you cannot uncross, Nia," he yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Sending a digital PDF to the country club. Do you think that is a game? You are exposing private family matters to the public. You are trying to destroy my mother." I stood calmly at the top of the stairs looking down at him. "I am not trying to destroy anyone, Julian," I replied, my voice ringing with icy detachment. "I am simply providing the financial receipts to a narrative your mother decided to start. If she did not want her private gambling debts exposed, she should not have hosted a tea party to lie about my mental health." Julian gripped the wooden banister, his knuckles turning white. "You think an email is going to stop her?" he sneered. "You think a little digital document is going to undo 30 years of the Vance family legacy in this city? Half the members probably sent your email straight to their spam folders. The people who matter in Atlanta do not care about a PDF. They care about physical presence. They care about lineage. My mother is still hosting the Generations of Excellence Gala next week, and you are going to pay for this." He turned around and stormed right back out the front doors, slamming them shut behind him. He thought his mother was still untouchable. He genuinely believed that a single email could be swept under the rug as a momentary lapse in judgment or a digital glitch. He thought the high society of Atlanta would simply ignore the truth if they could not hold it in their hands. He was incredibly wrong. The email was just a warning shot. The real counterattack was scheduled for the following morning. The next day was a Tuesday. Tuesdays at the Piedmont Country Club were notoriously busy. It was the day the board of directors held their weekly closed-door meetings, and the Prominent Ladies Auxiliary Committee hosted their exclusive brunch in the main dining room. Beatrice never missed a Tuesday brunch. It was her primary stage to hold court and assert her dominance over the other socialites. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, while the valet parking lot was completely full of luxury vehicles, a pristine white delivery truck pulled up to the main clubhouse. I had hired a premium private courier service. 4 men dressed in sharp black uniforms stepped out of the truck and unloaded a series of heavy cardboard boxes. They walked directly into the grand lobby of the country club and approached the main concierge desk. They did not drop the boxes and leave. They had very specific instructions. Inside those boxes were 412 beautifully bound confidential dossiers. I did not spare a single expense on the presentation. Each report was bound in heavy matte black leather with gold foil lettering on the cover that read, "The Vance Family Financial Audit, a 10-year review." The pages inside were printed on thick premium parchment paper. There were no insults printed in those pages. There was no emotional language, no angry rants, and absolutely no defensive statements about my own company. It was just pure, devastating, undeniable data. Section 1 of the bound report detailed Chloe's entire artificial life. It contained the exact dates and the exact dollar amounts that my corporate accounts had paid for her extensive cosmetic surgeries. It listed the rhinoplasty, the breast augmentations, and the expensive weekly chemical peels. It included the lease agreements for the white Porsche she drove, showing my signature as the primary financial guarantor, and her name merely listed as an authorized driver. It completely shattered her carefully curated image of a self-made social media influencer. Section 2 focused on Desmond. It laid out the massive financial black hole of his fake real estate developments. It showed the high-interest car loans, the luxury watch purchases, and the expensive golf club memberships, all funded directly by my wealth. It proved that he was a man who produced absolutely nothing but consumed everything. But Section 3 was the true masterpiece. Section 3 was dedicated entirely to Beatrice. By 10:15, the couriers had successfully hand-delivered a bound copy to every single member present in the clubhouse. They placed stacks of the leather books on the polished mahogany tables in the men's lounge. They handed them directly to the women sitting in the main dining room. They even delivered a dozen copies directly into the board of directors' meeting room. The chaos that erupted inside the Piedmont Country Club was immediate and absolute. Beatrice was sitting at her usual prime table near the large bay windows, sipping a mimosa and undoubtedly preparing to continue her smear campaign against me. According to the detailed report I received later from my inside contact on the club's administrative staff, Beatrice was mid-sentence when a courier respectfully placed the black leather book right next to her crystal glass. She opened it assuming it was a new menu or a charity event proposal. When her eyes scanned the first page, the color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. Around the dining room, the other wealthy women were opening their own copies. The silence that fell over the room was thick and suffocating. It was quickly replaced by a wave of sharp gasps and aggressive whispering. Mrs. Davenport, the formidable head of the membership committee, stood up from her table across the room. She held the open book in her hand, staring directly at Beatrice. The pages she was looking at contained the exact dates and the massive wire transfers I had made to cover Beatrice's secret underground casino gambling debts 3 years ago. It showed that the elegant, sophisticated matriarch of the Vance family was a degenerate gambler who had nearly lost her home to loan sharks before I quietly bailed her out. Beatrice tried to speak. She tried to laugh it off and claim it was a forgery, but you cannot argue with certified bank routing numbers and highly detailed financial ledgers. The proof was right there, resting heavily in their hands. For the first time in 30 years, Beatrice was not met with respect or fear. She was met with profound disgust. A few women actually started laughing. It was not polite laughter. It was the cruel, mocking laughter of the elite, realizing that the woman who had judged them so harshly was nothing more than a broke, hypocritical parasite. Beatrice grabbed her designer handbag and fled the dining room, practically running toward the exit. She was literally laughed out of her own committee meeting. Her reign of social terror was officially over. While Beatrice was fleeing the country club, Chloe was experiencing her own total destruction. She was sitting at home filming a sponsored video for a luxury skincare brand, preparing to post it to her hundreds of thousands of followers. Her phone began to vibrate violently. The bound reports had reached the executives of the country club, many of whom were heavily connected to the marketing agencies in Atlanta. Within a span of 45 minutes, Chloe received 3 separate emails terminating her most lucrative brand sponsorships. The brands did not want to be associated with a fraud. They realized that the lavish lifestyle she promoted to sell their products was entirely funded by her sister-in-law. She did not own the luxury car in her driveway. She did not own the designer clothes in her closet. She did not even own her own face. The illusion was completely shattered, and the corporate sponsors dropped her immediately to avoid the impending public relations disaster. I was sitting in my home office, calmly reviewing the latest logistics software updates for my company, when the final explosion occurred. The digital strike the day before had made Julian angry. The physical manifestation of the data counterattack had pushed him completely over the edge. The heavy front doors of the mansion did not just open this time. They sounded like they were violently kicked off their hinges. Heavy, erratic footsteps pounded up the marble staircase. The sound was terrifyingly fast, lacking any of his usual calculated swagger. My office door flew open, crashing violently against the drywall. Julian burst into the room. He was practically foaming at the mouth. His eyes were wide and manic. His suit was wrinkled and his chest was heaving uncontrollably. He gripped the door frame as if he needed it to stay standing. In his left hand, he was tightly clutching one of the black leather-bound reports. "You destroyed us," he screamed, his voice cracking with a terrifying mixture of pure agony and absolute hatred. "You actually destroyed my family." I sat back in my heavy leather chair, folding my hands neatly on my desk. The country club skirmish was over. I had systematically dismantled their social standing, their fake wealth, and their unearned pride. The social war had officially become a bloodbath, and I was the only one left standing without a single scratch. But looking at the wild, desperate look in Julian's eyes, I knew the hardest part of the battle was just beginning. He had nothing left to lose except his social mask. And I knew he was about to do whatever it took to keep his darkest secrets buried forever. I did not flinch as Julian threw the black leather-bound report across my office. It hit the edge of my mahogany desk and slid onto the Persian rug. He marched toward me, slamming his open hands down on the polished wood. "You sent that garbage to the entire Piedmont board," he bellowed, saliva flying from his lips. "You exposed my mother's gambling debts to women she has known for 3 decades. You terminated my sister's corporate sponsorships in less than an hour. Do you have any idea what you have done? You are going to pay for this, Nia. I am going to drag you through the most brutal divorce this state has ever seen. I am going to take half of everything. I let him scream. I sat completely still, breathing evenly and simply watching him unravel. His face was flushed red, and the veins in his neck were bulging against his collar. When he finally ran out of breath and stopped shouting, the heavy silence returned to the room. "Are you quite finished, Julian?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do not use that condescending tone with me," he snapped, straightening his posture and adjusting his suit jacket in a pathetic attempt to regain his dignity. "I am hiring a legal team this afternoon." "You are going to need a legal team, Julian," I replied slowly, opening the top drawer of my desk. "But not for a divorce. You are going to need a criminal defense attorney who specializes in federal financial fraud." Julian froze. His hand stopped fiddling with his jacket. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed his eyes, followed almost instantly by a flash of primal fear. I pulled out a printed copy of the corporate debt registry that Marcus had sent me earlier. I placed it squarely in the center of the desk, right where Julian had just slammed his hands. I did not say a word. I simply tapped my index finger against the bolded line item on the spreadsheet. Julian looked down at the paper. For a long moment he did not move. Then his eyes locked onto the numbers. The deep, angry flush in his cheeks vanished completely, replaced by a sickly pale ash color. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "You were so busy screaming about country club gossip that you forgot I have a forensic accountant on retainer," I said, my voice dropping to a surgical precision. "I know about Desmond's failing real estate company, Julian. I know he is running a massive, unregulated Ponzi scheme. I know you have been using your fake consulting firm to siphon legitimate corporate funds from Apex Health Tech to pay off his angry investors. And I know about the massive wire transfer you made this morning to prevent Miami loan sharks from breaking your brother's legs." Julian opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. "But we both know that is not the worst of it, is it, Julian?" I continued, standing up slowly from my chair. I walked around the edge of the desk until I was standing only 2 feet away from him. "That is just the pathetic background noise. The real crime is the $2.5 million federal Small Business Administration loan that was taken out under my company's name exactly 72 hours ago. A loan collateralized entirely by the deed to this very house. The house that I bought in cash." Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He took a tiny half-step backward. I pulled a secondary document from the folder. It was a scanned copy of the final loan authorization signature page. I held it up right in front of his face. "My signature is right here at the bottom of the page," I said, pointing to the ink. "It looks incredibly convincing. It is a masterful forgery." "But I never signed this document, Julian. I was in a board meeting all day Tuesday when this loan was finalized with the notary. You and your brother forged my signature to steal $2.5 million from the federal government to bail Desmond out of a criminal nightmare." I waited for the denial. I waited for him to start screaming again, to call me crazy, or to try and spin some elaborate lie about corporate misunderstandings. But the denial never came. Instead, something terrifying happened to the man standing in front of me. The panicked, desperate husband completely vanished. The angry, spoiled son, throwing a tantrum over his mother's social standing, disappeared. In his place, a cold, calculated sociopath emerged. The frantic energy drained entirely from his body. His breathing slowed down to a steady, rhythmic pace. He stood up taller, rolling his shoulders back and adjusting his silk tie with incredibly steady hands. The wild look in his eyes was replaced by an icy, dead stare. "You always were entirely too smart for your own good, Nia," he said, his voice completely stripped of any emotion. It was a flat, chilling monotone. "You committed federal bank fraud," I stated, my heart pounding heavily against my ribs despite my outward calm. "You used my name and my company to steal millions of dollars. You put a lien on the house our daughter sleeps in." Desmond needed the money, Julian replied casually, as if we were discussing the weather. The investors were threatening to go to the district attorney. The Miami creditors were threatening violence. I had to secure a massive injection of capital to wipe the slate clean and restructure the debt. The SBA loan was the only viable option that provided enough liquidity fast enough. We were going to pay it back slowly through the consulting invoices. You never would have noticed. You forged my signature? I repeated, the sheer audacity of his confession making my stomach churn. You tied my legitimate business to a federal crime. Julian tilted his head slightly, studying me with a terrifyingly blank expression. I did what I had to do for my family. Desmond is my blood. I am not going to let him go to federal prison just because a few rich idiots in Buckhead made bad investments. Your loyalty to your brother is going to cost you everything, Julian, I said, taking a step back and crossing my arms. Because I am not playing games with you anymore. I am handing all of this over to the authorities. I have already instructed my forensic accountant to prepare the data packages for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am reporting the forgery, the embezzlement, and the Ponzi scheme. You and Desmond are going to spend the next 15 years behind bars. I expected him to drop to his knees. I expected him to beg for mercy or offer to sign whatever documents I wanted if I just gave him time to run. Instead, Julian smiled. It was a slow, dark, extremely ugly smile. He took a deliberate step toward me, completely invading my personal space. He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming with a malicious, triumphant light. Are you really going to call the FBI? Nia? He asked, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Are you really going to invite federal agents into the corporate headquarters of Apex Health Tech? I held my ground, refusing to look away. Yes, I am. Julian let out a dark, breathless chuckle. He reached out and casually picked up the printed loan document from the desk, looking at the forged signature. You report this. The FBI raids your company, he said. His words calculated and incredibly sharp. They do not just politely ask for files, Nia. They kick the doors down. They confiscate every server, every hard drive, and every laptop in your building. They freeze your corporate operating accounts immediately pending a full investigation. Your software supports 52 major hospital networks. What happens to those hospitals when your servers are seized? I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but I kept my face entirely impassive. I will tell you exactly what happens. Julian continued, stepping even closer until I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. The hospitals terminate their contracts instantly due to breach of operational security. Your massive angel investors panic and pull their backing. The board of directors holds an emergency vote and fires you as the chief executive officer for gross negligence. Your stock price tanks to absolute zero in a matter of hours. He leaned down, his face mere inches from mine. And the best part is you cannot prove you did not sign this document, Nia. We are legally married. We share bank accounts. I am an authorized vendor for your company. To a federal prosecutor, this does not look like a forgery. It looks like a husband and wife running a massive criminal conspiracy together. You think they are just going to take your word for it? They will indict you right alongside me. I stared at him, realizing the full devastating weight of his trap. You love that company more than anything in this world, Julian whispered, his breath hot against my cheek. You built it from scratch. It is your entire identity. You are not going to let the federal government tear it to shreds. So go ahead, Nia. Pick up the phone, call the FBI, burn me to the ground. But just know that if I go down, you go down with me. We will share a prison transport van. He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs with sickening confidence. He had played his trump card. He had weaponized my life's work, turning my massive success into my greatest vulnerability. He genuinely believed he had me completely cornered. Julian took a slow, deliberate step backward, allowing the suffocating tension in the room to settle. He reached inside the breast pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. He tossed it onto my mahogany desk, right next to the forged federal loan papers. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. I am not an unreasonable man, Nia, he said, brushing a piece of invisible lint from his lapel. I do not actually want to see you go to federal prison. I do not want to see the company you built get torn apart by government auditors. So I had my attorneys draft a very simple, elegant solution to our current problem. I looked down at the thick stack of paper. Across the top in bold black letters were the words, post-nuptial separation and asset transfer agreement. What is this? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the rage boiling in my veins. That is your absolute salvation, he replied, a smug, arrogant smile returning to his face. It is a highly binding private contract. It outlines the exact terms of our immediate separation and impending divorce. If you sign it today, I will quietly pack my bags and walk out the front door. We will file for an uncontested divorce citing irreconcilable differences. There will be no messy public court battles. There will be no media leaks. And most importantly, there will be absolutely no mention of the Small Business Administration loan to the authorities. I will handle the payments on the debt myself through Desmond's shell companies, and Apex Health Tech will remain completely untouched. I picked up the document and began flipping through the pages. The legal jargon was dense, but the actual demands were incredibly transparent and entirely parasitic. You want me to sign the deed to this house over to your mother? I said, reading the property transfer clause aloud. You want me to give Beatrice a $10 million mansion that I bought with my own cash? Consider it an apology for the severe emotional distress you caused her at the country club yesterday, Julian replied smoothly. She needs a proper estate to maintain her standing in the community. You can afford to buy yourself a nice luxury penthouse downtown. The suburbs never really suited you anyway. I turned to the next page, my eyes scanning the financial support section. And you want $50,000 a month in permanent alimony? I stated, looking back up at him. You want me to pay you $600,000 a year for the rest of your life just to stay away from me? It is a very small price to pay for your total freedom, Nia, he reasoned, pacing slowly in front of my desk. You make millions. $50,000 a month is basically pocket change to you. Think of it as a premium insurance policy. It guarantees that the federal government never looks into your corporate ledgers. It guarantees that your hospital contracts remain secure. And most importantly, it guarantees that you get to keep your precious daughter all to yourself. He stopped pacing and leaned his hands on the desk, his voice dropping to a low, manipulative pitch. Look at the custody clause on page 12. I am willing to grant you full, absolute legal and physical custody of Zuri. I will waive all my parental visitation rights. You will never have to see me or my family again. But if you decide to fight me on this, Nia, I swear to you, I will drag that little girl into the ugliest custody battle in the history of Fulton County. I will demand 50-50 custody. I will force her to spend half the week living with my mother. I will use every single dollar of that federal loan money to hire psychologists and lawyers to prove you are an unfit, unstable mother who cares more about her software company than her own child. The sheer profound evil of his words hung heavily in the quiet office. He was weaponizing the two things I loved most in the entire world against me. He knew I would rather lose every single penny I had ever earned than see Apex Health Tech destroyed by an unearned scandal. He knew I would walk through fire before I ever let Beatrice get her toxic, manipulative hands on my daughter again. He had calculated my vulnerabilities perfectly. He was holding my life hostage and demanding a king's ransom for my release. Before I could formulate a response, Julian's cell phone rang. The loud, intrusive ringing pierced the heavy silence of the room. He pulled the phone from his pocket, glanced at the caller identification, and smiled broadly. Speaking of my mother, he said, tapping the screen to answer the call. He immediately pressed the speakerphone button and held the device out between us. Julian, did you show her the papers? Beatrice's voice crackled through the small speaker. Her tone was no longer the humiliated, panicked woman who had fled the country club dining room just hours ago. She sounded incredibly arrogant, deeply vindictive, and entirely triumphant. I am standing in her office right now, Mother, Julian answered, keeping his eyes locked intensely on mine. She is reviewing the terms as we speak. Beatrice let out a sharp, cruel laugh. The sound grated against my ears like rusted metal. I told you, Nia. She gloated, her voice echoing loudly in the spacious room. "I warned you just yesterday morning. I told you that you do not mess with our family. You thought you could publicly embarrass me and just walk away unscathed. You thought your little email report was going to destroy us. But the Vance family always wins." She paused, letting her absolute arrogance sink in. "Sign the papers, Nia," she demanded sharply. "Sign the deed to the house over to me today. Give my son what he is rightfully owed. Because if you do not, we will take absolutely everything from you. We will take your company, we will take your money, and we will take that little girl. You will be left completely empty-handed and entirely alone." Julian pressed the button to end the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He crossed his arms over his chest, radiating supreme confidence. "You heard her, Nia," he said softly. "The game is officially over. You played a good hand, but you lost. I am holding the winning cards. All you have to do is sign your name on the dotted line and this entire nightmare goes away. If you refuse, I make the phone call to my lawyers right now and we start burning your life to the ground." He reached into his jacket pocket one more time and pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He uncapped it and laid it gently on top of the legal contract directly in front of me. I stared at the gold pen. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to enact the trap I had been carefully building in my mind since the moment Marcus told me about the loan sharks. But a trap only works if the prey believes they are actually the predator. Julian needed to believe he had completely broken my spirit. He needed to believe that his extortion had worked flawlessly. He needed to feel the absolute intoxicating rush of total victory so he would let his guard down completely. I slowly shifted my gaze away from the post-nuptial agreement. I looked past Julian's smug face and focused my eyes on the edge of my desk. Resting perfectly on the polished mahogany was a small silver-framed photograph. It was a picture of Zuri. She was smiling brightly, holding a first-place ribbon from her school science fair. Her dark eyes were filled with such pure, innocent joy. She had no idea that her own father was currently standing a few feet away, actively using her as a pawn in a massive criminal extortion plot. She had no idea that the man who was supposed to protect her from the monsters in the world was actually the biggest monster of them all. I thought about the tears she had cried in the back of the SUV. I thought about the cruel, racist words Beatrice had spit at her. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated greed that had consumed this family for a decade and a half. I felt a genuine, profound wave of sorrow wash over me. Not for myself, but for the fact that my daughter had been born into a bloodline so deeply infected with absolute rot. I allowed that genuine sorrow to rise into my chest and travel up to my eyes. I did not fight the emotion. I let it physically manifest. I slowly dropped my shoulders, letting the rigid defensive posture I had held all afternoon completely collapse. I lowered my head, staring blankly at the gold pen on the desk. I blinked, and a single heavy tear escaped from the corner of my eye. It rolled slowly down my cheek, a hot, silent testament to my manufactured defeat. Julian watched the tear fall. His entire body relaxed. The tense defensive energy evaporated from his stance. He let out a long, heavy sigh of profound relief. He actually smiled. He had won. The brilliant, ruthless tech chief executive officer had finally been broken by the sheer weight of his manipulation. I slowly reached out with a trembling hand. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the gold pen. I picked it up, feeling its heavy, expensive weight in my palm. I looked up at Julian through my watering eyes. I made sure my face displayed nothing but absolute crushing defeat. "Okay," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. The sound was incredibly fragile, barely filling the quiet space between us. "Okay, Julian, I will sign." Julian reached out and snatched the gold pen from my trembling hand. He did not ask me to sign the contract right then and there. That would have been entirely too simple for a family completely obsessed with theatrical dominance and public image. He wanted a spectacle. He looked down at me with a sickeningly triumphant grin and announced that I was going to sign the property transfer and the massive alimony agreement on stage at his mother's Generations of Excellence Gala the following Saturday. He told me it was going to be framed to the high society crowd as a generous charitable donation to the Vance Family Trust to save face and repair the damage I had caused at the country club. I kept my head bowed and nodded weakly, playing the role of the utterly broken wife to absolute perfection. Over the next 6 days, my $10 million mansion transformed into a hostile occupation zone. Julian moved his expensive clothes back into the master bedroom, behaving as if he had just conquered a small country. He swaggered through the wide hallways of the house, barking orders at the private chef and demanding that my housekeeping staff press his suits. He drank my expensive scotch and invited his brother Desmond over to smoke cigars on the back patio, celebrating their massive victory over the woman they viewed as nothing more than a glorified ATM machine. Chloe came over on Wednesday afternoon, acting as if the humiliating country club exposure had never even happened. She sprawled out on my living room sofa, flipping through designer catalogs and loudly planning her outfit for the upcoming gala. She openly discussed which brand-new luxury car she was going to lease on Monday, assuming that my signature on the post-nuptial agreement meant the platinum credit lines would instantly reopen. They paraded their unearned arrogance right in front of my face, and for 6 agonizing days, I swallowed my pride and let them do it. I walked around my own home with my shoulders slumped. I spoke in a quiet, submissive whisper. I avoided making eye contact with Beatrice when she stopped by to inspect the floral arrangements for her precious event. I allowed them to gorge themselves on the intoxicating illusion of absolute control. But behind their backs, the pacing of my retaliation accelerated to a breakneck speed. I was not crying in my bedroom. I was not mourning the loss of my marriage. I was working. While Julian slept soundly next to me, dreaming of his $50,000 a month alimony payments, I was wide awake in my home office securing my empire. While Chloe and Beatrice were busy ordering thousands of dollars worth of white roses and imported champagne for the gala, I was quietly slipping out of the house through the service entrance to attend highly classified off-the-books meetings. On Thursday morning, I drove my unassuming secondary vehicle to a nondescript gray office park on the outskirts of Atlanta. I walked into a sterile, windowless conference room where Marcus, my forensic accountant, was already waiting. Sitting across the long metal table from him were 3 special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and a senior prosecutor from the United States Department of Justice. The air in the room was incredibly tense. I was a high-profile tech executive walking directly into the jaws of the federal government to report a $2.5 million fraud tied directly to my own company. It was a massive, calculated risk. Julian was right about one thing. If the government believed I was complicit, they could freeze my corporate assets and destroy Apex Health Tech in a matter of hours. But Julian fundamentally underestimated my meticulous nature. I did not walk into that room with empty hands and a sob story. I walked in with an ironclad, impenetrable fortress of evidence. I took my seat at the table and opened my heavy briefcase. I handed the lead prosecutor a massive stack of highly organized files. I gave them the unredacted bank routing numbers from Desmond's Ponzi scheme. I provided the fake invoices Julian had used to siphon legitimate money out of my corporate accounts. I handed over the digital footprints, the IP addresses, and the exact time-stamped evidence of the $500,000 wire transfer to the violent Miami loan sharks. And finally, I presented the Small Business Administration loan documents. I placed my own corporate security logs on the table, proving unequivocally that I was physically inside a locked boardroom surrounded by 12 witnesses at the exact moment the fraudulent loan was notarized across town. I even provided the encrypted audio recording of Julian actively extorting me in my office, explicitly admitting to the forgery and threatening to destroy my company if I reported him. The federal prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in a tailored gray suit, reviewed the files in absolute silence for nearly 45 minutes. The only sound in the room was the turning of pages and the quiet humming of the overhead fluorescent lights. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide with a mixture of professional shock and deep respect. She looked at me and then looked at the FBI agents. The case was a prosecutor's absolute dream. It was a perfectly wrapped gift of federal financial crimes, complete with a neat little bow of extortion. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. I told them I was fully prepared to testify in open court. I told them I would provide unrestricted access to my personal hard drives to facilitate the immediate arrest of Julian and Desmond Vance. But I also laid out my absolute non-negotiable terms. I demanded full corporate immunity for Apex Health Tech. I demanded a legally binding guarantee that the Department of Justice would not freeze my operational accounts or raid my corporate headquarters. I needed my hospitals to remain online and my innocent employees to remain completely untouched by the criminal actions of my estranged husband. Because I was the chief executive officer, proactively reporting the fraud myself, with undeniable ironclad evidence of my innocence, the prosecutor did not even hesitate. She drafted the immunity agreement right there in the conference room. I signed the federal document securing the absolute safety of my life's work. As I shook the prosecutor's hand to seal the deal, she looked at me and asked how exactly I wanted to handle the physical arrests. The FBI agents were ready to kick the doors of my mansion down that very afternoon. I smiled a cold, calculating smile. I told them that arresting Julian and Desmond in the privacy of my home would be entirely too quiet. I told them the Vance family was obsessed with high society events and public spectacles. I requested that the federal agents allow them to attend their highly anticipated gala on Saturday night. Let them put on their expensive tuxedos. Let them drink their champagne. Let them stand on a stage in front of the entire Atlanta elite before the handcuffs were slapped onto their wrists. The prosecutor agreed. The trap was officially authorized by the federal government of the United States. Saturday morning arrived with a frantic, suffocating energy. The mansion was buzzing with makeup artists, hairstylists, and private tailors. Beatrice was running through the halls screaming at her assistants over the phone. Chloe was admiring herself in the massive foyer mirror, wearing a $15,000 designer gown that I had technically paid for. Julian walked into my bedroom, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked incredibly handsome and utterly demonic. He held out his hand, offering me a small velvet box containing a diamond tennis bracelet. He told me to put it on and remember my place. He told me to smile for the cameras and make sure my signature was legible when he handed me the property deed on stage. I took the bracelet and fastened it around my wrist. I looked at him in the mirror and promised him that tonight would be a night the Vance family would remember for the rest of their lives. The Generations of Excellence Gala was being held at the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead. It was the most opulent ballroom in the entire city. When we arrived, the room was already packed with hundreds of wealthy socialites, politicians, and influential business leaders. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the tables. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted filet mignon. Beatrice was holding court near the center of the room, soaking in the admiration of her peers. She genuinely believed she had survived the country club scandal. She thought my impending public surrender on stage would completely restore her fractured reputation and prove to everyone that she was the undeniable victor. While Julian was busy shaking hands and ordering expensive drinks from the open bar, I quietly slipped away from our VIP table. I navigated through the crowded ballroom, keeping my head down until I reached the heavy double doors leading to the backstage area. I walked down a dark carpeted hallway and stepped into the dimly lit audiovisual control room. The room was filled with massive glowing monitors, soundboards, and complex wiring. The lead event technician, a young man wearing a black headset, looked up in surprise as I locked the door behind me. "Mrs. Vance," he said respectfully, taking off his headset. "Is there a problem with the microphone levels?" Beatrice requested that we increase the volume for her opening remarks. "There is no problem with the microphones," I replied, walking over to the main control console. I reached into my small sequined clutch and pulled out a heavy encrypted USB drive. Marcus had spent the last 2 days compiling the files on this drive. It was not a simple PDF document this time. It was a highly produced, devastating audio-visual presentation. It contained the high-definition security footage of Julian and Desmond sitting in the corrupt notary's office explicitly joking about forging my signature. It contained the audio recording of Julian extorting me in my home office. It contained the massive highlighted bank statements proving Beatrice was entirely broke. I handed the secure USB drive to the lead technician. I placed a crisp $100 bill on top of it. I need you to bypass the charity promotional video queued up on your primary timeline. I instructed, my voice completely steady and commanding. I need you to load the main video file on this drive and route it directly to the massive projector screen in the center of the ballroom. Route the audio directly through the main surround sound speakers. The technician looked down at the drive and then back up at me, slightly confused. "When do you want me to play it?" he asked. I looked through the small glass window of the control booth, staring out at the sparkling ballroom. I watched Julian proudly leading Beatrice up the carpeted stairs toward the grand stage. The moment of their absolute destruction was finally here. "Play this exactly when I give the signal." I stepped out of the dimly lit control booth, leaving the bewildered audiovisual technician staring at the encrypted drive resting on his console. I smoothed down the heavy fabric of my emerald green silk evening gown and took a slow, measured breath. I walked down the carpeted hallway and merged back into the glittering, chaotic energy of the St. Regis ballroom. The space was completely packed to maximum capacity. Everyone who was anyone in Black Atlanta society was in attendance tonight. There were federal judges, prominent civil rights attorneys, highly successful real estate developers, and the entire board of directors from the Piedmont Country Club. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated effortlessly through the massive crowd, carrying polished silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes and expensive caviar hors d'oeuvres. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the room full of predators pretending to be civilized elites. I easily spotted Beatrice holding court near a massive, intricately carved ice sculpture in the absolute center of the room. She was wearing a dazzling floor-length silver sequined gown dripping with heavy diamond jewelry that I knew for an absolute fact she could not afford. She was acting as if she were actual royalty, holding a glass of vintage champagne and throwing her head back in fake musical laughter. She patted the arm of a prominent city councilman, playing the role of the gracious, benevolent matriarch. She was working the room aggressively, deliberately trying to scrub away the lingering toxic stench of the financial audit I had dropped on her country club friends just a few days prior. Standing just a few feet away from her was Chloe. She was wearing the $15,000 designer dress she had paraded around my house in earlier that week. Chloe was smiling widely, posing for photos with other socialites, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire fabricated life was currently sitting on a USB drive in the back room, waiting to be completely incinerated. They genuinely believed tonight was their ultimate vindication. They believed my spirit had been entirely broken, and that my impending public surrender would permanently cement their high status in the city. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, painful grip grab my bare elbow. I turned quickly to see Julian standing directly behind me. His jaw was tightly clenched, and his eyes darted nervously around the crowded ballroom, making sure no one was paying attention to us. Without saying a single word, he pulled me aggressively toward the back of the room, dragging me behind a thick, heavy velvet curtain that concealed a private VIP alcove. The heavy fabric fell shut behind us, muting the loud chatter and the jazz music. We were completely hidden from the hundreds of guests. Julian let go of my arm and immediately reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored black tuxedo. He pulled out a sleek, dark leather presentation folio. It looked exactly like the kind of expensive folder used at charity galas to display massive, oversized checks or present prestigious community awards. He opened the leather folio and shoved it toward my chest. Inside, resting perfectly flat against the velvet lining, was the post-nuptial separation and asset transfer agreement. The contract that demanded I sign over my $10 million mansion to Beatrice and pay him $50,000 a month for the rest of his life. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out the same heavy gold-plated fountain pen he had used to threaten me in my home office. "The program is starting in exactly 5 minutes, Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh, commanding whisper. My mother is going to take the stage to give the opening keynote address. When she finishes speaking, she is going to call us both up to the podium. I stared blankly at the contract, playing the role of the terrified, submissive wife. Why do I have to bring this on stage? I asked, keeping my voice small and incredibly fragile. You said I just had to sign it tonight. You never said I had to do it in front of a massive audience. Julian let out a dark, condescending chuckle. You think we are just going to let you sign a divorce paper in the shadows after the massive public stunt you pulled at the country club this week? He sneered, leaning closer until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. You humiliated my mother in front of her peers, Nia. You made people think our family is completely broke. We have to correct the narrative immediately, and you are going to help us do it. He tapped the thick leather folio with his gold pen. To the hundreds of people sitting in that ballroom tonight, this is not a divorce contract and a property deed transfer. My mother is announcing the launch of the brand new Vance Family Educational Trust. When we walk up on that stage, you are going to open this folio and sign your name right on the dotted line. But to the audience, it is going to look like you, as the highly successful tech chief executive officer, are signing a historic $5 million charitable endowment directly over to her foundation. I looked at him, letting the sheer magnitude of his twisted manipulation sink in. He was using a fake charity announcement to force me to sign away my house and my money in front of hundreds of witnesses. It was a brilliant psychopathic strategy. If I hesitated or refused to sign on stage, I would look like a heartless, wealthy elite backing out of a massive philanthropic promise to underprivileged children. It was the ultimate social trap designed to force my compliance through sheer public pressure. You are going to smile for the cameras, Julian commanded, his eyes turning cold and lethal. You are going to hug my mother. You are going to sign the paper handing the deed to the mansion over to her. And you are going to do it all while looking like a generous, happy wife. Because if you hesitate for even 1 single second, I swear to God, I will walk right off that stage and call the federal authorities to report the SBA loan myself. Do you understand me? I looked down at the gold pen in his hand and then back up into his dark, threatening eyes. I understand, Julian, I whispered softly. I will do exactly what needs to be done tonight. His rigid shoulders finally relaxed. He smiled a genuine, arrogant smile, completely convinced that he had won the absolute final victory. He handed me the gold pen. I took it, gripping the cool metal tightly in my palm. Good, he said, adjusting his silk bow tie. Now wipe that miserable look off your face and take my arm. It is time to put on a show. Julian pushed the heavy velvet curtain aside and guided me back out into the glittering ballroom. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. A loud, elegant chime echoed through the room, signaling the guests to take their seats at the massive circular dining tables. We walked to the primary VIP table, located directly front and center, just a few feet away from the grand stage. Julian pulled my chair out for me, playing the role of the perfect doting husband for the surrounding guests. I sat down, placing the dark leather folio carefully on my lap, keeping my hand resting directly on top of it. The main ballroom lights slowly dimmed, casting the audience into a soft shadow. A bright, brilliant spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the grand stage. Beatrice walked out from behind the heavy stage curtains. The crowd immediately erupted into polite applause. She glided across the polished wood floor, her silver sequined gown catching the bright light and sparkling like a million tiny stars. She stepped up to the clear crystal podium and adjusted the microphone with a practiced, elegant grace. She looked out over the sea of wealthy faces, her smile radiating pure, artificial warmth. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Beatrice began, her voice echoing powerfully through the massive surround sound speakers. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the generations of excellence. She paused, waiting for the absolute silence to settle over the room. When you reach my age, you spend a great deal of time reflecting on the concept of legacy. Beatrice continued, placing her hand delicately over her heart. In this city, in our beautiful, vibrant community, we place a profound value on the institution of family. But family is not merely a biological connection. Family is a fortress. It is an unyielding, unbreakable bond forged through deep, unconditional love and fierce, unwavering loyalty. I sat perfectly still listening to her weave a web of absolute hypocritical lies. Recently, there have been certain unfortunate rumors circulating within our community. Beatrice said, her voice taking on a tone of manufactured sorrow. Rumors designed by jealous outsiders to fracture the foundation of the Vance family name. But I stand before you tonight to tell you that true family cannot be broken by petty gossip. True family weathers the absolute darkest storms together. We forgive one another, we protect one another, and most importantly, we elevate one another. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. A few prominent women at the surrounding tables actually nodded completely, buying into her manipulative performance. That is why tonight I am incredibly proud to announce the official creation of the Vance Family Educational Trust, Beatrice declared, raising her voice to a triumphant crescendo. A foundation designed to empower the next generation of our community. And this massive undertaking would not be possible without the profound generosity and deep familial loyalty of my brilliant son Julian and his devoted, beautiful wife, Nia. The crowd erupted into massive applause. Julian and Nia Beatrice called out, extending her hand toward our table with a massive, beaming smile. Please come up to the stage and join me. Let us show this city what true family unity really looks like. Julian stood up immediately, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He reached down and grabbed my hand, pulling me up from my chair. His grip was entirely too tight, a sharp physical warning disguised as an affectionate gesture. I picked up the dark leather folio, holding it tightly against my chest. We walked together through the cheering crowd. Every single eye in the massive ballroom was locked directly on us. We reached the edge of the stage and walked up the carpeted steps, stepping directly into the blinding heat of the primary spotlight. We walked over to the crystal podium. Julian stood slightly behind me, placing his hands firmly on my shoulders, a visual display of dominance and control. Beatrice stepped back from the microphone, her eyes flashing with pure venomous victory under the bright lights. She reached out her hand, waiting for me to open the leather folio and sign my life away. I looked at her outstretched hand. I looked down at the heavy gold pen still clutched tightly in my fingers. And then I looked out at the massive audience of Atlanta elites waiting expectantly for a charitable donation that did not exist. I did not open the folio. I did not raise the gold pen. Instead, I took a deliberate step forward, completely breaking away from Julian's heavy grip on my shoulders. I reached out, ignoring Beatrice's extended hand entirely. I grabbed the sleek metal stem of the microphone and pulled it directly out of the crystal podium stand, holding it firmly in my own hand. The background music completely faded out. The polite applause abruptly stopped. The entire St. Regis ballroom fell dead silent. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a single crystal champagne flute clink on the far side of the massive room. Julian stood frozen just a few steps behind me, his hands suspended awkwardly in the air where my shoulders had just been. He looked slightly confused, but not yet panicked. He likely assumed I was simply overwhelmed by the moment or going off script to deliver a more emotional, personalized speech before signing the fake charitable endowment. Beatrice stared at me from across the stage, her perfectly painted lips parted in severe irritation. She gave me a sharp, subtle nod, instructing me to hurry up and read my lines for her wealthy audience. I did not look at her. I brought the microphone up to my mouth, keeping my grip tight on the cold metal. I looked directly into the blinding heat of the primary spotlight, and then out at the hundreds of expectant faces waiting in the dim elegance of the ballroom. Family legacy is built on truth, I said, my voice booming through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. My tone was steady, surgical, and completely devoid of the fragile fear I had been faking all week. A murmur rippled through the front tables. Julian took a hesitant step forward. Beatrice just stood here and told you all that family elevates one another. I continued, projecting my voice to the very back of the room. She told you that the Vance name is an unbreakable fortress. So tonight, I want to share the absolute truth about this family. I want to show you exactly how this beautiful fortress was built and exactly whose money paid for the bricks. I turned my head slightly toward the back of the room where the small glass window of the audiovisual booth was located. I raised my left hand, allowing the heavy diamond tennis bracelet Julian had given me to catch the bright stage lights. I gave the lead technician a sharp, undeniable nod. The signal. Instantly, the primary ballroom lights plunged into total pitch-black darkness. A collective gasp of confusion swept through the elite crowd. Above our heads, the mechanical hum of a massive 60-foot motorized projector screen echoed as it began to lower slowly from the ceiling, right behind the grand stage. Julian finally realized something was terribly wrong. He lunged forward, reaching for the microphone in my hand. "Nia, what the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his voice frantic and tight. "Give me the mic." I stepped smoothly out of his reach. The projector beamed to life, cutting through the darkness with a blinding white light. But it did not display the elegant gold logo of the fake Vance Family Educational Trust. It displayed crystal-clear, high-definition security camera footage. The scene on the massive screen was the interior of a cheap fluorescent-lit office. The date and timestamp flashed bright white in the bottom right corner, showing Tuesday afternoon at 2:15. It was the exact time I was sitting in my secure corporate boardroom, surrounded by my executive team. Sitting at the cheap laminate desk in the video were Julian and his brother Desmond. Between them sat a nervous-looking notary public pushing a thick stack of federal loan documents across the table. The audiovisual technician had followed my instructions flawlessly. The audio from the hidden security camera was routed directly through the St. Regis massive concert speakers. The voices echoed off the crystal chandeliers with terrifying absolute clarity. "So you are absolutely sure she will not get an email alert about the collateral?" Desmond's voice boomed through the ballroom. On screen, Desmond was biting his nails, sweating profusely in a wrinkled dress shirt. Julian's face, 10 feet tall on the projector screen, leaned forward and laughed. It was a cruel, arrogant laugh that made my stomach turn. "Relax!" Does the giant version of Julian echoed loudly. I intercepted the physical mail and redirected the digital bank notifications to a dummy server. "She is so busy playing girl boss at the hospital network, she will not look at the property deed for another 10 years. Just hand me the pen so I can forge her name. We have to get this 2.5 million wired to Miami by Friday, or those loan sharks are going to break both of our legs." The crowd gasped in unison. It was a massive wave of collective shock that physically vibrated through the air. I saw David Harrison, my lead board member, jump entirely out of his seat. Several women screamed in genuine horror. Men in expensive tuxedos dropped their jaws, staring at the screen in absolute disbelief. I turned to look at Julian. The arrogant swagger was completely gone. He was staring up at his own giant face on the screen, his mouth hanging open, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as though his soul had just forcibly left his body. He was completely paralyzed, trapped in the headlights of his own destruction. On the screen, the giant version of Julian confidently forged my signature on the Federal Small Business Administration loan. The video abruptly cut to black. But the presentation was far from over. A series of high-contrast financial documents began to flash rapidly across the screen, each one lingering just long enough for the wealthy audience to read the devastating numbers. First came Desmond's corporate bankruptcy filings and the active federal fraud complaints from his angry real estate investors. The documents clearly outlined a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme operating right under the noses of the Atlanta elite. I watched two prominent investors sitting near the front row turn pale as they recognized their own names on the list of defrauded victims. Then the screen transitioned to Beatrice. A massive scanned copy of her actual primary checking account statement appeared. The name Beatrice Vance was highlighted in bright yellow. The account balance displayed in massive bold red font was exactly $12.43. Right next to it flashed the receipts for the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had personally paid to clear her dangerous underground gambling debts. The illusion of the wealthy, aristocratic matriarch was publicly slaughtered in front of her entire social circle. I looked over at Beatrice. She was not standing tall holding court anymore. She had stumbled backward, clutching the side of the clear crystal podium just to keep herself from collapsing to the floor. Her face was the color of wet ash. She looked out at the audience, seeing the expressions of sheer disgust, horror, and pity on the faces of the women she had spent decades looking down upon. Mrs. Davenport, the head of the country club membership committee, was actively shaking her head in revulsion. Chloe was sitting at the VIP table below the stage with her hands covering her face, sobbing hysterically as people literally moved their chairs away from her table, wanting no physical proximity to the fraud. The final document flashed on the screen. It was the forged SBA loan, complete with my fake signature side by side with the post-nuptial extortion contract Julian had tried to force me to sign tonight. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice cut through the panicked, chaotic chatter of the ballroom like a sharpened blade. As you can clearly see, there is no charitable trust, I announced, staring directly into the crowd, ensuring every single person heard me. There is only a desperate criminal family attempting to extort me to cover up federal bank fraud and illegal money laundering. The Vance family legacy is nothing but a mountain of stolen money and cheap lies, and the bank is permanently closed. The shock finally wore off, and Julian's paralysis morphed into absolute feral rage. He realized his life was entirely over. His pristine reputation was dead, his fake wealth was gone, and his extortion plot had been broadcasted to the most powerful people in the state of Georgia. There was no spinning this. There was no gaslighting his way out of a high-definition confession. He let out a guttural, animalistic scream. Before Julian could even close the short distance between us, the heavy brass handles of the grand ballroom doors at the back of the room were violently thrown open. The sound of heavy solid wood crashing against the walls echoed like a gunshot.